The elevator doors parted on the 32nd floor of Meridian Tower with a soft, expensive hiss. Ethan Calloway stepped out first, making sure his shoulder blocked the gap long enough for Lily to slip through behind him. She was 7 years old, wore her auburn hair in 2 lopsided pigtails because he still hadn't mastered that particular skill, and was carrying a laminated library card against her chest, the way some children carry stuffed animals like it was the most important object in any room she entered. "How many floors is 32? She whispered. "A lot," he said. "More than our apartment building?" "About 4 times more." She tilted her head back, studying the ceiling as if trying to calculate the math. The lobby stretched ahead of them, pale limestone floors, a reception desk wrapped in brushed steel, a wall of glass that looked out over a gray November sky. The whole floor smelled of fresh coffee and controlled ambition. Ethan adjusted the folder under his arm. He had assembled it the night before, working at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, in the specific quality of quiet that a small apartment produces when a child is sleeping, not silence exactly, but something domestically contained, safe at its edges. He had printed his resume twice, and discarded the first version because the margins looked asymmetrical under the harsh overhead light. Then he had sat back and looked at what he had made, and tried to see it the way a stranger would see it. The folder contained his resume, 2 letters of recommendation, and a brief portfolio of maintenance and facilities management work going back 11 years. It was not a glamorous portfolio. It did not have the kind of trajectory that made human resources managers sit up straighter. What it had was a record of every problem he had ever been handed, followed by a record of how he had solved it systematically, completely, without drama. The gap was visible. 14 months of contract work, each engagement lasting 3 to 6 months. None of them at the level his earlier career suggested he should be operating at. He had thought about how to address this in a cover letter, and had decided, in the end, to say it plainly. He had left a demanding shift work role to provide stability for his daughter following the death of his wife, and he had spent the intervening period working at whatever level was available to him, while looking for a position that matched his actual capabilities. This was the truth. He was not ashamed of it. He was, however, aware that it required the reader to extend a particular kind of generosity that not every reader would extend. He approached the reception desk. The young man behind it glanced at the two of them, the man in the pressed but clearly off-the-rack dress shirt, the child with the library card, and his expression managed to be professionally neutral in a way that communicated a great deal. "Ethan Calloway. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the head of building, safety, and compliance." The receptionist typed without looking at him. "Miss Hartwell will be with you shortly. Please take a seat in the waiting area." He paused, then added, "There is a children's play area on this floor, 2nd corridor on your left. It's a shared employee amenity. But we sometimes accommodate children of candidates while interviews are in progress." Lily tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Can I?" "Stay inside the room," he said. And the way he said it wasn't anxious, it was calm, specific. A man who gave instructions he expected to be followed. "Don't go anywhere else in the building. If anything feels wrong, you come find me immediately." What would feel wrong? He thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was a smell, or a sound, or the kind of pressure, change in the air, that announces itself before your brain has put language to it. But those were the answers of a professional, and what she needed was the answer of a father. "You'll know," he said. She seemed satisfied with this answer and went, still holding her library card. Ethan waited 22 minutes past his scheduled appointment time. He noted this without judgment. Companies often tested candidates through the waiting, and he had learned long ago that the quality of a person's patience was a better signal of their character than anything they said in an interview. The waiting area had 2 other people in it. One was a younger man in an expensive suit, who kept checking his phone and visibly recalibrating his posture every few minutes, adjusting the fall of his jacket, crossing and uncrossing his legs, running a calculation Ethan recognized as the assessment of whether the wait itself was a sign that his application was not going well. The other was a woman in her late 40s, reading an actual printed magazine with the focused attention of someone who genuinely enjoyed reading printed magazines, impervious to the room around her. Ethan thought about both of them briefly, and then looked out the window at the city. He had lived in this city for 9 years. He knew its bones, the old warehouse district that had been converted to lofts, the chemical plant on the eastern edge, whose evacuation procedures he had personally redesigned during his 3rd year with the county fire department, the glass bridge downtown that had a structural flex variance that most engineers didn't account for, but that he had cataloged during a late-night walk with Lily 2 years ago when she was 5, and still small enough to sit on his shoulders. She had held his head like a steering wheel, pointing where she wanted to go, and he had walked wherever she aimed, and spent the whole time looking at the joints between materials and the behavior of stressed concrete at low temperatures. He had left the fire department 14 months ago. The decision had not been complicated, exactly, but it had taken a long time to arrive at. After Sarah died, the calculus changed. He could still remember, precisely, the moment the change registered, not at the funeral, not in the weeks after, but on a Tuesday morning 11 months later when he had come home at 7 a.m. from a 24-hour shift, and Lily had been sitting at the kitchen table in her school uniform. And she had looked at him with an expression that was not unhappy, but was thoroughly unsurprised by his absence. She had adjusted. She had built a life that did not expect him to be there for its ordinary moments. She was 6 years old, and she had already learned to grieve for a living parent, the way she was still learning to grieve for a dead one. He had sat down across from her and said nothing for a long time. Then he had handed in his notice. He had tried to make it work for a year and a half before that. He had failed, so he had made a different choice, the harder choice disguised as the smaller one, and had spent the last year working a series of contract facilities jobs while looking for something permanent that paid enough, something that used what he actually knew, something that would let him be home when Lily ate dinner, and asleep when she slept, and present in the ordinary hours that turned out, when you added them up, to constitute a childhood. A door opened. A woman in a charcoal blazer stood in the doorframe and said his name in a tone that was not unkind. Exactly, but had the brisk quality of a person who had already made decisions and was simply completing the procedural steps. Her name was Victoria Hartwell, and she was the chief executive officer of Meridian Group, not, as Ethan had expected from the job listing, a department head conducting a search. He registered this shift quietly and recalibrated. She was 36, he estimated. Sharp-boned face, dark hair pulled back with the kind of severe precision that announced it was not a style choice but an efficiency choice. She had the bearing of someone who had worked twice as hard as everyone around her for a decade and was permanently alert to the possibility that someone might forget this. There was nothing soft about the way she occupied a room. She filled it with intention, every movement purposeful, every pause deliberate. It was a performance of control so sustained and complete that it had, he suspected, long since stopped being a performance and simply become how she existed. The office she led him into was large and organized to a degree that went past professional into something closer to a psychological statement. Every object on her desk occupied its position deliberately. The books on the shelves behind her were arranged not by height or color but by subject, and the subjects formed a coherent intellectual biography. Structural engineering codes, corporate governance texts, crisis management literature, 2 thicker volumes on organizational psychology. There were no personal photographs. The single piece of art on the wall was an architectural, rendering the Meridian Tower complex itself. Viewed from the northeast at dawn, everything clean lines and glass catching light. She sat. He sat. She opened his folder without looking at him, and read for approximately 45 seconds in the manner of someone who had already read it before and was confirming their memory was accurate. "Your degree is in structural engineering," she said. "That's right. You didn't complete your master's." "No. I left the program to join the fire department." She turned a page. "You were a firefighter. And then, it says here, a fire investigator. Structural fire investigator. I assessed post-incident building integrity and identified failure points, specifically how the fire traveled through a structure, which materials failed, and in what sequence, what the building's design contributed to or mitigated the spread. Then I moved into fire safety engineering consultation, which meant working with architects and developers on new construction to identify vulnerabilities before they became incidents. And then you did facilities management for a subcontracting firm. She said this without emphasis, but the sequence she had just recited implied a shape, a man who had started in one place, moved sideways again. I took care of my daughter after my wife passed, he said. The shift work wasn't compatible. She looked at him for the first time with full attention. Not sympathy, he didn't want that, but an assessment, as if she was deciding how much of this to credit. He held her gaze without discomfort. He had been looked at this way before, and he had learned that the most effective response was to simply be exactly what he was and let the assessment land where it would. This position requires someone who can audit and rebuild our safety infrastructure across all 3 buildings in this complex, she said. We had an incident 18 months ago, a dry pipe suppression system that failed during a test activation. No injuries, but it was close. The board is committed to restructuring our entire compliance framework. I read the incident report, Ethan said. She paused. That report was internal. There was a summary filed with the city fire marshal's office. It's a matter of public record. He had also, through a contact from his fire department days, read the full internal version, but this wasn't the moment for that. The failure mode was predictable. The system was installed to code, but the code hadn't been updated to account for the thermal cycling patterns in this building's HVAC architecture. The air pressure variance in the 3rd floor ceiling plenum created a repeated micro-stress on the actuation valve. It failed the way it was always going to fail eventually. A silence. You read a summary report, Victoria Hartwell said, and determined that. I cross-referenced the building specs from the city permitting database and the HVAC schematics from the contractor who built this complex in 2009. They're also public record. He paused. I look at buildings the way other people look at people. I want to know where the stress is. She closed the folder. When she looked at him, there was something in her expression he couldn't immediately name, not quite hostility, not quite interest, something still deciding which direction to become. Mr. Calloway, she said. You're overqualified for the technical requirements of this role, and underqualified for its administrative scope. You haven't managed a budget of this size. You haven't overseen a team larger than 4 people. Your employment history over the last 14 months reflects someone who has been, by any objective measure, professionally adrift. Each sentence arrived cleanly, without cruelty, but without cushioning either. He noticed that she was looking at him while she said it, not performing the delivery at the middle distance, not softening it with a downward gaze. She was watching him the way she had watched his folder, looking for what the information revealed. The board needs someone who projects institutional credibility, she continued. Clients, insurers, regulatory bodies, they need to see someone whose record is continuous and legible. I'm not sure yours is. Is the position about projecting credibility, he said. Or about ensuring that no one in this building dies because a valve fails in a ceiling plenum. The air in the room changed slightly. Not dramatically, Victoria Hartwell was too controlled for dramatic air changes. But something shifted. I understand the distinction you're drawing, she said. It doesn't resolve the administrative concern. The administrative concern is learnable. What I know about how buildings fail isn't. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the folder, the way you close a conversation. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Calloway. We'll be in touch. He stood, picked up his own copy of his resume she hadn't handed the folder back, and walked to the door. Mr. Calloway. He turned. The position is likely to go to someone with a different profile. She wasn't apologizing. She was informing. I wanted to be straightforward with you. I appreciate that, he said, and meant it. She was in a small bright room at the end of the second corridor, and when he appeared in the doorway she looked up from where she was sitting cross-legged on a cushioned mat, her library card now tucked into the pocket of her cardigan. A picture book open across her knees. Well, she said. Let's go get breakfast, he said. She studied his face with the focused attention of a child who has learned to read adult faces the way other children read storybooks. Then she stood up, tucked the picture book back into the shelf she had taken it out. She put it away and came to take his hand. The lady was mean? The lady was direct, he said. Those aren't the same thing. What's the difference? Mean is when someone's trying to hurt you. Direct is when someone's trying to save time. Lily considered this. I don't think I like her. You've never met her. I don't like the building. It smells like people trying too hard. He almost laughed. Come on. They moved back through the corridor toward the elevator bank. The floor was laid out in a long rectangle, the conference rooms and executive offices on the interior, glass walls on the exterior edge overlooking the city. As they passed the junction of the main corridor and the secondary hall, Ethan slowed. He was not sure why. He had a habit, cultivated over years of walking into structures and cataloging their risks, of registering things below the threshold of conscious attention, small wrongnesses, atmospheric shifts, the particular quality of air that meant something somewhere was not as it should be. He smelled something, not much, a trace, something with the acrid, slightly sweet edge of PVC insulation under heat stress. He stopped. Lily looked up at him. Bah, hold on, he said. He turned toward the source. It was coming from the secondary corridor, the one they had just passed. Past the play area. Toward the suite of rooms at the building's eastern wing. And then the fire alarm went off. It did not begin as chaos. These things never did, in his experience. There was always a brief, collective stillness. First, the moment when every person in a building runs a rapid internal calculation about whether this is a drill, whether they need to move, whether someone else will handle it. In that stillness, Ethan was already moving. Stay with me, he told Lily. And he said it quietly, but with a particular quality that she recognized and obeyed immediately. He moved back down the corridor at a pace that was fast without being a run, the pace of a man assessing, not panicking. Smoke was beginning to show at the base of a door to his left, thin and gray, the kind of smoke that meant a fire still finding its oxygen. The door had a small glass panel at eye height. Through it he could see the beginning of orange in the far corner, a storage room that had been pressed into service as additional office space, judging by the furniture arrangement. The fire was in the corner by the electrical panel. Classic. An overloaded circuit in a room with inadequate ventilation. He pulled Lily close. Listen to me. You're going to take the stairs. The marked stairwell is at the end of the main corridor. The green sign. You go down. You walk out the front entrance. You stand on the far side of the street from the building and you wait for me. You do not stop. You do not wait for anyone. You do not come back in. Do you understand? What about you? I'm going to make sure everyone else gets out. Bah. Lily. He knelt, brought his eyes level with hers. I know what I'm doing. This is what I was trained for. You follow the green signs. You wait across the street. I will come out. That's not a promise to make you feel better. That's a statement of intention by a professional. Do you know the difference? She nodded, though her eyes were wet. Go, he said. She went. He stood, turned toward the growing sound of voices and the smell of thickening smoke. And he went to work. The eastern wing of the 32nd floor contained, he cataloged this, as he moved 2 conference rooms, a printing and supply alcove. And, at the very end of the corridor, a room with a hand-painted wooden sign that read, Meridian Little Ones, Employee Child Care. He had not noticed it on his way in. He noticed it now, with the acute, cold attention that comes when something matters very much. The door was closed. The smoke at its base was not thin. 50 feet from the door, a woman was being restrained by 2 colleagues. She was not hysterical in the dramatic way. She was hysterical in the specific, targeted way of a mother who knows her child is in a room and cannot reach it. She was fighting the hands on her arms with methodical desperation, her face chalk pale, her voice stripped down to a single syllable she kept repeating. Ethan recognized her from the interview. Victoria Hartwell. She had not looked at him. She was not seeing anyone. There was nothing left in her but the one thing. He assessed the door. The smoke was moderate at the base. The fire hadn't fully penetrated this room, which meant the door was acting as a barrier, buying time. The handle, when he tested it with the back of his hand, was warm but not hot. The fire was not immediately behind the door. He pulled his dress shirt out of his trousers and tore a strip from the hem with the calm efficiency of a man tearing a strip from his shirt, which was exactly what he was. He tied the strip across his nose and mouth. He took 3 deep breaths of clear air from near the floor. He opened the door and went in. The room was 30 feet deep, designed brightly primary colors on the walls, low furniture, soft playmats. The smoke was heavy but not yet total. There was a cleaner layer near the floor. The fire had come through the connecting wall from the storage room. Via a conduit chase, he could see the breach in the lower right corner, a ragged hole fringed with char, orange light flickering through it. 3 feet from the hole, curled beneath a low table, was a child. She was small, 4, maybe 5, with dark curling hair and a red cardigan. She was completely silent, which was worse than crying. The children who cried were still fighting. The ones who went quiet had stopped. "Hey," Ethan said. And he moved the table aside and crouched down in one motion, making himself small, bringing his face to her level. "I'm here. I've got you." Her eyes were open. She was looking at him with an expression. He recognized the expression of a person who has been in fear for so long, they have moved through it, into a kind of suspension, waiting for the next thing to be either better or worse. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Your mom sent me." He had no idea if that was true. It turned out not to matter. She moved toward him. He gathered her against his chest and pressed her face into his shoulder. And he pressed his own improvised mask tighter against his face. And he stood. The conduit breach in the corner flared. A tongue of heat rolled across the ceiling. Something above them made a sound like a structure rethinking its position. Ethan moved. He kept to the left wall, away from the breach, staying as low as a man carrying a child could stay. The smoke was thicker now than it had been 20 seconds ago. He could feel the heat on the back of his neck like a hand pressing. The door was at the far end of a room that had tripled in difficulty since he entered it. He had been in worse rooms. He thought of the Creston Avenue fire. 7 years ago, the apartment building where he had been off duty, visiting a friend on the 3rd floor when the alarm sounded. He had gone up 6 flights of stairs in a building where the stairwell was already compromised, navigating by feel through smoke so dense he could not see his hand in front of his face, guided only by the faint crying of a child in a room whose door he found by running his fingers along the wall until he felt heat on the wrong side. 4 trips. 11 people who made it out because he kept going back. The 12th had been an infant he had found not in a crib, but tucked into a laundry basket that a panicked parent had pushed into a closet in some instinct toward safety that had accidentally saved its life. He had carried that infant out in the crook of one arm while his other hand braced against a wall that was 2 minutes from catastrophic failure. This was smaller than that. He reminded himself of this. The fire here was contained, still finding its edges, still negotiating with the oxygen in the room. The breach in the corner was bad, but not spreading as fast as it would in an older building. The suppression system had failed, but the door had held. He moved through the smoke with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned that panic costs oxygen, and oxygen is the resource that decides everything. His eyes were open. He registered the position of obstacles by memory and by feel. A low shelf to his right, a corner of mat material under his foot, a rocking chair that had been pushed against the wall. Behind him, the orange glow at the conduit breach flared and settled and flared again like something breathing. Chloe had her face pressed against his shoulder and both arms around his neck, and she was not making a sound. He spoke to her constantly, quietly. The kind of low, even narration that gives a frightened person something to anchor to. "We're moving. We're almost there. I know where the door is. I've done this before. You're safe. You're doing so well. We're almost there." The door. He hit it with his shoulder, not his hand, not stopping, not pausing, hitting it, in the way you hit a door when you intend to be through it, and it gave, and he was through. The corridor was full of smoke and noise, and people who had been standing there paralyzed the way people stand when they are witness to something that exceeds their training. They parted. He walked through them. At the end of the corridor, Victoria Hartwell had stopped being restrained because the people restraining her had finally let go, and she was moving toward him. And he was moving toward her, and when they met, she took the child from his arms with a sound that wasn't a word. It was something older and more fundamental than language, and held her daughter's face in both hands, and the child made a sound. Finally, the kind of sound that meant she was back. Ethan stepped to the side. He leaned against the wall. He coughed twice, controlled, productive coughs. The kind that clear rather than panic. His eyes were watering from the smoke. The back of his right hand had a minor thermal contact burn, maybe 3 inches across, that he would need to run under cool water. He waited. Emergency services arrived 7 minutes after the alarm. The fire was contained to the eastern wing and extinguished with no structural loss beyond the storage room and the connecting wall. 2 people had minor smoke inhalation. No one was seriously injured. The child's name was Chloe. She was 4 years and 3 months old. She was treated by paramedics on the sidewalk outside the building, sitting in the back of an ambulance with an oxygen mask held near her face, while her mother sat beside her, not letting go of her hand. Ethan sat on a concrete planter 30 feet away, watching the activity with the detached attention of a man who has been present at too many incidents to be fully consumed by any one of them. A paramedic came to look at his hand. He let her. A police officer asked him questions. He answered them accurately and without embellishment. Lily found him 17 minutes after he exited the building. She came across the street at a controlled walk she had not run. She had learned to match his emotional register when things were serious, and stood in front of him and looked at his wrapped hand and his red eyes and his smoke-darkened shirt. And she said, "I told you that building smelled wrong." "You were right," he said. She sat down next to him on the planter and leaned against his arm. 40 minutes after the incident, as Ethan was preparing to take Lily home, someone said his name. He turned. Victoria Hartwell was standing 6 feet away. She was not in the position of authority she had occupied in the office 2 hours earlier. She was in the position of a person who has been stripped of everything situational and is operating from something more fundamental. Her blazer was gone. There was ash on her forearm. She was holding her daughter's hand, Chloe, still wrapped in an emergency mylar blanket, watching Ethan with the wide, serious eyes of a child cataloging a stranger who had done something she didn't yet have language for. "Mr. Calloway," Victoria said. "Miss Hartwell, a silence." "She was hiding under the table," she said. "She does that. When she's scared, she hides under things and goes quiet. None of the—" She stopped. The staff had evacuated. They thought she had gotten out with the group. She was hiding. He nodded. "You went in when no one else would," she said. It wasn't a compliment, exactly. It was an attempt at understanding, like she was trying to integrate new information into a model that hadn't previously accounted for it. "I knew what I was doing," he said. "Most of the people here didn't. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one." Another silence. Chloe tugged her mother's hand and looked up at her. Then back at Ethan. "You have ash on your face," Chloe told him, with the frank observation of a 4-year-old. "I know," he said. "Does it hurt?" "Not very much." She considered this. Then she looked at Lily, who was watching her with the focused assessment of one small person evaluating another. "Is that your little girl?" "That's my daughter, Lily," Ethan said. "Hi," said Chloe. "Hi," said Lily. And after a moment, with the social pragmatism of childhood, "Do you want to see my library card?" 3 days later, Ethan received a phone call. It was from Meridian Group's head of human resources, a man named Douglas Ferris, who spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who has been given specific instructions about both what to say and what not to say. He asked if Ethan would be willing to come in for a follow-up conversation. "Not an interview," he clarified. "A conversation." Ethan asked Lily what she thought. She was eating toast. She didn't look up. "The building that smells wrong? That one. Did you fix the smell?" "Not yet." "Then you have to go back," she said simply, with the logical certainty of someone for whom problems and their solutions exist in a straightforward causal relationship. You can't leave something half-fixed. He supposed she was right. Ethan came. The 32nd floor looked different in the absence of emergency. The eastern wing was sealed off behind temporary construction barriers, and the building smelled faintly still of chemical suppressant. But the lobby was back to its limestone quiet. The young man at the reception desk, the same one from 3 days earlier, looked at Ethan with the uncertain recognition of someone who isn't sure whether to acknowledge what he knows or treat this as a fresh interaction. He chose the latter, which Ethan found professionally appropriate. He was shown not to Victoria Hartwell's office, but to a smaller conference room. Douglas Ferris was there, along with a woman introduced as Nadia Cole from the company's legal and compliance team. They had a folder in front of them. His folder, he noted the same one Victoria had held and set aside 3 days earlier. They had, Douglas explained, done some additional research into Ethan's background following the incident. We contacted the county fire department, Nadia said. She was precise and direct in the way people become when they have spent time working with information. We spoke with the chief investigator you reported to during your tenure as a structural fire investigator, Captain Reyes, Ethan said. He described you, as she glanced at her notes, the most technically rigorous person he had worked with in 30 years, and said that when you left the department, it was the department's loss and not yours. She paused. He also said, you had been offered a promotion to division chief twice and had declined both times. The hours, Ethan said. After my wife. Yes. She made a note, or pretended to. We also found the citation. From 7 years ago. He was quiet. The apartment building fire on Creston Avenue, Douglas said. You were off duty. You were in the building visiting a friend, the report said. You went back in 3 times. 4, Ethan said. The report missed one. The last family was on the 6th floor, and the stairwell had already failed, so I had to use the exterior fire escape, which wasn't reflected in the internal incident log. A silence. 11 people, Nadia said. 12, he said. There was an infant who wasn't on any occupancy record. She looked at him for a moment, with the expression of someone recalibrating. Mr. Calloway, the position we initially considered you for head of building safety and compliance, we'd like to propose a different conversation. We are reconsidering the scope of the role itself. I appreciate that, he said. But before we go further, they waited. The suppression system on the eastern wing of this floor, he said. The failure mode 3 days ago wasn't the electrical overload. The electrical overload was the ignition event. The suppression system should have activated within 90 seconds of the alarm, and it didn't. That's the second time the system on this floor has failed an activation event. The first was 18 months ago, and the root cause wasn't fully addressed. He slid a 4-page document across the table. He had written it the previous evening at his kitchen table while Lily slept. He had written it because the problem was real, and the problem was still present, and it had not occurred to him to wait for a job offer before documenting a building he knew was going to hurt someone if nothing changed. This is what I found when I walked through the eastern wing the morning of the interview, before the fire. I was waiting in your reception area for 22 minutes. I have a habit of looking at buildings. Douglas picked up the document. Nadia leaned over to read it with him. Their expressions, as they read, shifted through several stages: initial skepticism, careful attention, the particular concentration of people encountering something they had not expected to encounter. The thermal cycling problem in the ceiling plenum is still present, Ethan said. The valve was replaced after the first incident, but it was replaced with the same model. The stress pattern is already restarting. He paused. You have a window of 3 to 4 months before you have a third activation failure. If there's a fire during that window and the suppression system doesn't activate, we understand, Nadia said quietly. Good, he said. Then we're starting in the right place. The offer came 5 days later. The title was Director of Safety Infrastructure, a new position, created by reformulating 3 existing roles into a single remit with a budget and a team of 6. The salary was substantial. The autonomy was genuine. He read the offer letter twice at the kitchen table, while Lily ate cereal across from him. Then he set it down. Good news? She asked. I think so. The mean lady's company? The direct lady's company, he said. And she wasn't mean. She just didn't know the whole picture. Lily dragged her spoon through her cereal. Are you going to take it? He thought about this. He thought about the building, its thermal cycles, its pressure variances, its valve that was currently in the early stages of the same failure pattern it had already failed twice. He thought about the 22 minutes he had spent waiting, seeing things no one else had seen, and then being told he wasn't legible. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am. Because it pays well? Because the building needs someone who knows where it hurts," he said. "And because I've been thinking about buildings since I was 24 years old and I'm better at it than almost anyone I know, and it's time I stopped treating that like an embarrassing fact and started treating it like the thing I'm here to do." Lily nodded slowly, with the gravity of a 7-year-old absorbing something she would understand differently at 17 and differently again at 40. "Okay," she said, "but I still don't like the way it smells." "I'm going to fix that," he said. "The HVAC recirculation rates are off. It creates a kind of pressure that makes the air feel odd." "Sorry." He found her on the 34th floor, standing in front of a window that looked over the Eastern Wing's construction barriers, holding a cup of coffee with both hands and watching the repair work below with the expression of a person who has reorganized something interior and is waiting to see how it settles. He hadn't been looking for her. He had been walking from a meeting with his new team, a group of facilities professionals who were, to varying degrees, surprised by what he expected of them and what he was prepared to show them. He had spent the first hour giving each of them a task that was not the task they thought it was. He had asked them to walk a section of the building and write down anything that seemed wrong or off or uncertain, with no further guidance. Most of them came back with lists of cosmetic issues, a scuff here, a loose handle there. One of them, a young engineer named Marcus Webb, came back with a handwritten page that included the observation that the air circulation in the northeast stairwell was inconsistent with the building's HVAC design, which suggested either a blockage or an incorrect valve setting in the distribution manifold. Ethan had looked at that page for a moment and then told Marcus he had found the right job. The route from that meeting room passed this particular window. "How's the HVAC recalibration going?" Victoria said, without turning. She had heard him the way people who are good at their environments hear specific footsteps. "We'll have the thermal cycling pattern corrected by end of month," he said. "The new valve spec is already ordered. I want to do a full dry pipe test on all 3 buildings before the recalibration is complete. Before, worst case, is when things are stressed," he said. "You want to know how something performs when the conditions aren't ideal." She turned then and looked at him. He noticed for the first time, really. Because the first time had not been the kind of context in which you noticed this, that she looked genuinely tired. Not professionally tired, the kind that gets managed and concealed behind precision and pace. The kind that comes when you have been frightened at a bone level and you are still absorbing it. There were shadows under her eyes that her usual composure normally covered. She was not, in this moment, covering them. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You already apologized." "I apologized for my daughter's life. That was..." She stopped. "That was not the apology I need to give you. I dismissed your candidacy on the basis of legibility. I looked at a record that had a gap in it, a gap that existed because you made a decision to be a present parent to a child who needed you, and I called it a drift." She paused. "That was a failure of judgment. You were working from the information you had. I was working from an assumption," she said, "that the shape of a career tells you the quality of a person. I knew that assumption was limited. I chose to use it anyway because it was fast." She held his gaze. "I won't make that error again." He thought about all the things he could say to this. He thought about the afternoon he had sat across from Lily while she ate cereal and realized his daughter had learned to live without expecting him. He thought about what it cost to make the choice that left a visible gap in a record. A gap that looked like failure from the outside and felt, from the inside, like the only decision that was actually right. "The gap was real," he said. "I was adrift, for a while. Not professionally, I always knew how to do the work. But there's a kind of loss where you stop knowing what you're for. And I was in that for about 18 months. It looked like lateral movement. It was grief." Victoria Hartwell was quiet for a moment. She looked back out the window. Outside, a worker in a hard hat crossed the barrier line and disappeared from view. Below them, the city continued its ordinary operations, indifferent to the ways people inside buildings were reorganizing their understanding of each other. "Chloe asks about you," she said. "Does she? She asks if the man who carried her out was magic." I told her no, he was an engineer. She paused. She asked what the difference was. Ethan looked at the construction barriers and the pale November sky above them and thought about that. What did you tell her? I told her I was still working it out. A pause. A quality of silence that meant something specific, that had a shape and a direction. I'm Victoria, she said, and held out her hand. And the gesture was not the CEO extending courtesy to an employee. It was a person beginning something without the title in front of it, beginning it cleanly, without the scaffolding. Ethan, he said, and took her hand. 4 months later, the Eastern Wing was fully rebuilt. The suppression systems across all 3 buildings had been redesigned, recertified, and tested twice. Then again, because Ethan had insisted on a 3rd test under non-ideal conditions. The building's insurer had, upon review of the new compliance documentation, reduced Meridian Group's premium by a figure that made the board approve the remaining infrastructure budget without discussion. The HVAC recirculation rates had been corrected, and the air on the 32nd floor no longer smelled, as Lily had accurately observed, like people trying too hard. Marcus Webb had been promoted. He was now running the systems audit program Ethan had designed, and was the kind of engineer who would one day be able to see a building's stress patterns without being told where to look. Ethan was already teaching him. The child care room had been relocated to the 31st floor, away from the electrical infrastructure, with 2 points of egress, a dedicated suppression circuit, and a response protocol that had been reviewed by Ethan personally and drilled with the staff 4 times. After the 4th drill, the child care staff had told him, gently but firmly, that they understood the protocol and would appreciate not drilling it a 5th time until the following quarter. He had agreed, and had gone back to his office and updated the schedule in his calendar. He had not made the building perfect. You couldn't make a building perfect. You could understand where it was stressed and where it was likely to fail, and you could work constantly at the margins, widening the distance between the current condition and the failure state. Every morning he walked a different section of the building before his first meeting, not because he was required to, because it was how he understood the thing he was responsible for, and because understanding it completely was the job. And the job was not something he did at a building, it was something he was in relationship with, which required presence and attention, and the willingness to keep looking even after you thought you'd seen everything. On a Thursday morning in March, with winter beginning to pull back from the city, and a pale, tentative sunlight coming through the windows of the 32nd floor, Ethan was walking back from an inspection of the pressure valves in the East Wing when he heard his name. Not Mr. Calloway, just his name. Victoria was standing in the corridor with Chloe beside her, who had apparently been brought in for what Ethan gathered from the context was an emergency situation involving a grandmother who was supposed to be collecting Chloe from preschool, but had gotten the days confused. Chloe looked at Ethan with the frank, uncomplicated assessment of a 4-year-old who has already decided about someone. "You still have ash on your face," she said. "That was months ago," he said. "I washed it off." "There's a little bit left," she said seriously. Victoria caught his eye above her daughter's head with an expression that occupied the space between apology and delight. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes, she said. "Do you?" "I have nothing for another hour," he said. "I have to warn you. She will ask you to explain everything you know about buildings." "That's convenient," he said. "Because I have a lot to say about buildings." Chloe looked up at him. "Do buildings have feelings?" He crouched down to her level. "Not exactly," he said. "But they have memories. They remember everything that's happened to them every time they got too hot. Every time something stressed their structure. Every time someone fixed something that was going wrong. That memory is in the material itself, in the way things bend and settle and hold. An engineer who knows how to read a building can tell its whole history from the way the stress is distributed. Where it's been worked hard, where it's been protected, where it's healed." Chloe was quiet for a moment, processing this with the seriousness it deserved. "Like scars," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "like scars." She thought about this some more. "Do you have scars?" He showed her the back of his right hand, where the thermal contact burn from November had healed to a faint pale mark about 3 inches across. She studied it with the focused attention of someone learning to read a new kind of text. "Does it hurt?" Not anymore, he said. She nodded, satisfied, and then looked up at her mother. He has building memories too, she announced. Victoria was watching him with an expression he had come to recognize over the past 4 months, an expression that appeared most often when he said something that reconfigured a category she had been operating from. Not surprise exactly, more like the quiet satisfaction of a person who is discovering that a definition she had long used is narrower than the thing it was meant to describe. When you're done explaining buildings to my daughter, she said, I'd like to buy you coffee. He stood. The pale March light came through the window and sat on the floor between them. I know a place, he said. 2 weeks after that, Lily finally met Chloe properly. It happened on a Saturday, in a park 3 blocks from Meridian Tower, and Chloe showed Lily how to find shapes in clouds, and Lily showed Chloe how to use a library card, and Ethan and Victoria sat on a bench at a careful adult distance from each other, watching their daughters, not saying much, which is the particular quality of silence between 2 people who have stopped performing and have not yet started anything new. They were, all 4 of them, in a period between one thing and the next, a period of tentative warmth, of beginnings without the pressure of beginnings. The city was doing what cities do in early spring, reconsidering itself, opening, admitting light into places that had been cold. It was, in the estimation of everyone present, an excellent morning.